She entered the training yard dressed in weathered boots and a white t-shirt dulled by countless washings. Not a single member of the squad believed she could endure even one day of training. An instructor erupted in laughter and bellowed, "This is special operations training, not a beauty pageant." However, when she was compelled to remove her clothing for inspection, and the blazing serpent tattoo wrapped around a crimson symbol appeared on her exposed back, an absolute hush descended. The camp commander, who had just arrived, immediately stood at attention and rendered a salute, his voice trembling. "We have a ghost viper in our midst." From that instant forward, no one would dare regard her as merely a trainee again. Yet that moment lay far in the future, and Sarah Mitchell's journey had not begun in that dust-covered yard. She was 28 years old, with gentle, flowing brown hair that cascaded freely, never arranged, and a lean build that led people to assume she was fragile. Her face remained unadorned by cosmetics, displaying only a serene composure in her eyes that discouraged scrutiny. She had been born into one of the nation's most affluent families, raised under rigid principles. Carry yourself with grace, never boast, always maintain your position. Yet Sarah did not conduct herself like an aristocrat. She donned simple clothing, operated an aging pickup truck, and maintained a modest existence. People observed her faded t-shirt and scuffed boots, then passed judgment. They assumed she was impoverished, displaced, unremarkable. They remained unaware of the inner strength she possessed, or the sorrow that had led her to this place. 3 months prior, her world had crumbled. Her brother Tommy served as her anchor, the one who had made their restrictive upbringing tolerable. He was 2 years her senior, possessing a laugh that could illuminate an entire room and a tendency to draw her into escapades, midnight drives, sneaking into abandoned theaters, racing bicycles along remote roads. He was the sole person who truly perceived her, not the family reputation or the expectations. Then came the telephone call on a cold morning, an impersonal voice from some military office. Tommy was deceased, killed during a covert operation, details classified. No remains, no farewell, merely a folded flag left upon her doorstep. She sat on her apartment floor, clutching that flag, her fingers tracing the stars. The silence was overwhelming. That was when she made her decision. Tommy had always spoken about the NATO Special Forces program, describing it as the ultimate challenge. She would enlist for his sake, to carry forward his spirit. The training facility sprawled across dust and metal in a desert wasteland, heat waves rising from the ground. Sarah arrived on the first day carrying a battered duffel bag and a heart burdened with loss. The other cadets, all men, noticed her immediately, not because she commanded attention, but because she deliberately avoided it. Her t-shirt hung loosely, her military trousers were frayed, her boots worn thin. She neither spoke nor smiled, nor attempted to prove herself. This made her a target. Before she could even set down her bag, the whispers commenced. "What is she doing here? She'll quit before noon. I bet she's only here for the publicity." Sarah heard every word, yet she did not look up. She adjusted her bag, found a position at the group's periphery, and gazed toward the horizon, her jaw clenched. The first humiliation arrived swiftly, barely an hour into the program. The head instructor, Carlson, was a massive man with a crew cut and a voice capable of shattering stone. He thrived on breaking recruits, feeding off their fear. He spotted Sarah in formation, standing quietly, and targeted her. "Well, observe this," he boomed loudly enough for the entire yard to hear. "Did you wander in from a yoga studio, sweetheart?" The squad erupted in laughter, rolling like thunder. Carlson crossed his arms, smirking. "This is special operations training, not a beauty contest. Are you certain you're in the correct location?" Sarah did not flinch. She simply regarded him, her eyes unwavering, her hands relaxed at her sides. The laughter intensified. Cadets nudged each other. A wiry individual named Derek, wearing a falsely friendly grin, tossed an empty water bottle in her direction. Catch, he shouted. Time to practice those reflexes, baby. The bottle spun through the air, gleaming in the sunlight. The squad watched, anticipating her fumble, expecting her to prove she was as incompetent as they believed. Instead, Sarah moved as though she had been born for this moment. She flicked her heel, sending the bottle upward in a fluid arc. Without breaking eye contact with Carlson, she shifted her weight and caught it mid-flight with her left hand. The maneuver was so clean, so precise, it appeared effortless. The laughter ceased. The yard fell silent. Derek's grin froze in place. A short cadet named Ryan, standing in the rear, whispered, "What kind of technique was that?" Carlson's smirk faltered. He cleared his throat, his jaw tightening. "Very well," he muttered, gesturing dismissively. "Fall into line." Sarah placed the bottle down gently, as though it were insignificant, then walked to her position. The cadets stared, but she offered them no acknowledgement. The harassment did not cease there. On the second morning, during a equipment inspection, the squad stood in formation under the scorching sun, sweat streaming down their faces. Sarah's duffel rested at her feet, neatly organized but worn, the canvas frayed from years of use. A cadet named Mitch, a stocky individual wit, the boisterous laugh and a habit of dominating conversations, decided to create a spectacle. He kicked her bag forcefully, sending it sliding across the dirt. Her canteen rolled out alongside a small notebook she used for training observations. "Oops," Mitch declared, his voice dripping with false innocence. "Appears your purse got in the way, princess." The squad howled, some applauding as though it were entertainment. Mitch retrieved the notebook, examining it with exaggerated curiosity. "What is this? Your diary? Writing romantic letters to your imaginary boyfriend?" He tore out a page and crumpled it, hurling it at her feet. Sarah's grip tightened on her bag strap, but she remained silent. She knelt, collected the canteen, and retrieved the crumpled page, smoothing it carefully. The squad laughed harder, but her silence burned more intensely than their words. Training proved to be a relentless ordeal. Sprints through suffocating dust, push-ups until arms collapsed, obstacle courses that left participants bruised and bloodied. The instructors pushed everyone, but they pushed Sarah harder. They wanted her to quit. She sensed it in the way they barked her name, assigned her the heaviest pack, watched her as though waiting for her to crack. Yet she did not break. She matched the men stride for stride, her breathing steady even when her body screamed in protest. The comments never ceased, however. Each time she passed a cadet, there was something. "Go home, princess. You're slowing us down. Why is she even here?" She did not respond. She continued moving, her boots stirring up dust, her eyes fixed ahead. But every taunt inflicted pain. Not because she valued their opinions, but because every sneer, every laugh reminded her of Tommy's voice, teasing her with that broad grin, always concluding with, "You're tougher than me, kid." That afternoon during a rest period, Sarah sat alone on a crate, consuming a protein bar from her kit. The squad clustered nearby, joking loudly, but their eyes kept drifting toward her. A cadet named Travis, lanky, with a sharp tongue and a propensity for confrontation, saw an opportunity. He strolled over, water canteen in hand, and stumbled deliberately as he passed her. The water splashed across her t-shirt, soaking it completely, the fabric clinging to her skin. "Oh, my mistake," Travis said, his voice thick with mockery. "Thought you might require a shower, looking so grimy." The squad roared, some doubling over, others pointing as water dripped onto the ground. Travis leaned closer, his voice low, but audible to the others. "Perhaps next time, wear something that doesn't appear salvaged from a dumpster." Sarah's fingers paused on the protein bar wrapper, her eyes lifting to meet his. She did not speak. She simply stood, shook the water from her hands, and walked to her bag to retrieve a dry shirt. The squad's laughter followed her, but her steady steps cut through it like a blade. Something shifted that evening, however. During a navigation exercise, the squad was divided into pairs to traverse a challenging section of desert armed only with a map and compass. Sarah was partnered with Ryan, the quiet cadet who had whispered about her bottle catch. He was struggling, his compass trembling in his hands as he attempted to plot their route. The other pairs had already departed, their voices fading into the dusk. Sarah glanced at the map, then at Ryan's frustrated expression. Without a word, she took the compass, adjusted it, and pointed toward a ridge in the distance. "That's our reference point," she said, her voice calm. Ryan hesitated, then nodded. They reached the checkpoint first, well ahead of the others. As they waited, Ryan looked at her, his voice subdued. "What do? Here, did you learn that?" Sarah did not answer. She simply handed him the compass and sat down, her eyes on the horizon. The other cadets arrived, glancing at them, but nobody spoke. On the second day, during a gear inspection, she encountered a moment that cut deeper. The squad was unpacking their equipment, and Sarah's duffel spilled open when Derek accidentally kicked it. Her belongings scattered: socks, a water canteen, a small photograph of her and Tommy taken years ago at a county fair. They were laughing, arms around each other, the sun bright behind them. Derek picked it up, smirking. "Who is this? Your boyfriend?" he said, holding it up for the others to see. "Looks like a loser." The squad laughed, but Sarah's hand froze mid-motion. She did not look at him. She simply reached out, took the photograph, and tucked it back into her bag. "Don't touch my belongings," she said, her voice low and steady. Derek opened his mouth to respond, but the expression in her eyes stopped him. He backed away, muttering, but the moment lingered. She could still feel Tommy's arm around her in that photograph, hear his laughter. She zipped her bag and continued. The cruelty escalated on day 4 during a live fire exercise. The squad was practicing with rifles, each cadet assigned a lane to engage moving targets. Sarah's lane was adjacent to Mitch's, and he ensured she was aware of his presence. As she lined up her shot, he leaned over, his voice loud enough for nearby cadets to hear. "Hey, sweetheart, are you certain you can handle that weapon? Don't want you shooting your own foot off." The squad snickered, heads turning. Mitch fired his rifle, then deliberately bumped her arm as she aimed, sending her shot wide. The target remained untouched, and a red light flashed on her lane, signaling a miss. The instructor, a lean man named Kessler, shook his head. "Mitchell, you're wasting ammunition," he barked. Mitch grinned, reloading his rifle. "Perhaps she's better suited for knitting than shooting," he said, winking at the others. The laughter spread, sharp and cutting. Sarah reset her stance, her fingers steady on the rifle, and fired again. The target dropped. She did not look at Mitch. She simply ejected the spent cartridge and waited for the next round. Day 3. The rope climb arrived, a trial that distinguished the capable from the inadequate. A 10-meter rope suspended from a steel framework, swaying in the desert breeze. Carlson summoned Sarah forward first. "She's the most lightweight," he declared, his tone dripping with mockery. "Let's observe if she can manage it." A broad-shouldered cadet named Jake, wearing a condescending smile, leaned closer. "Careful not to damage a fingernail, princess," he remarked. The squad chuckled, drawing energy from his antagonism. Sarah approached the rope. Her hands gripped it firmly, her gaze fixed upward. She seized it tightly, prepared to ascend. However, as she began, someone jerked the rope violently from below. Her grip faltered and she struck the ground, dust clouds swirling around her. The squad applauded, laughing as though witnessing a comedic performance. "Admirable attempt," Jake called out. "Should we retrieve a ladder for you?" Sarah avoided his gaze. She rose, brushed the dirt from her knees, and grasped the rope once more. The laughter subsided as she climbed. Her arms functioned like precision machinery, fluid and powerful, propelling her upward in one seamless motion. She relied solely on her arms, not her legs, higher and higher, faster than anyone anticipated. The stopwatch registered 6.2 seconds when she reached the summit. The previous record stood at 9.4 seconds. The training yard fell completely still, and Jake's smirk vanished entirely. Ryan, the reserved cadet, whispered, "Who exactly is she?" Sarah descended the rope, her expression impassive, and returned to formation. Carlson remained speechless. He simply made notes on his clipboard, his lips compressed into a thin line. The rope climb incident failed to silence the squad's harassment. By the 5th day, they discovered a new method to torment her. During a team relay where cadets transported 50-pound sandbags across a half-mile course, Sarah was grouped with Derek, Travis, and another cadet named Paul, a tall individual with a perpetual frown. As the exercise commenced, Paul deliberately fell behind, then hurled his sandbag at Sarah's feet. "Carry this, princess," he commanded, his voice frigid. You might as well contribute something useful." The others laughed, reducing their pace to observe the spectacle. Sarah's arms already ached from her own burden, yet she showed no hesitation. She hoisted Paul's bag onto her opposite shoulder, her stride wavering under the additional weight. The squad jeered, some mimicking her strained posture, others shouting, "Look at her go, the little pack mule." She continued forward, perspiration streaming down her face, her boots sinking into the sand. When she crossed the finish line, her shirt was completely soaked and her hands were raw from exertion. Paul retrieved his bag without acknowledgement, but the instructor recorded her time. She had carried double the required load and still surpassed half the competing teams. That evening, an unexpected event occurred. The squad had gathered around a fire pit for a rare moment of leisure time. The desert sky stretched clear and star-filled above them. Sarah sat isolated from the group, cleaning her boots with a cloth, her movements deliberate and methodical. A supply officer, an older man named Carter with a weathered complexity, approached her position. He had observed the relay exercise from the sidelines. He crouched beside her, keeping his voice low to prevent others from overhearing. "I witnessed your actions out there," he said, "carrying that additional bag. Nobody requested it of you, yet you did it nonetheless." Sarah didn't raise her eyes, continuing to clean her boots. Carter extracted a small patch from his pocket, a unit insignia, worn but dignified. "This belonged to me years ago. You earned it today." He placed it beside her and departed. Sarah's fingers paused on the cloth. She picked up the patch, examined it in her hands, and secured it in her bag. The squad failed to notice the exchange, but Ryan observed it. He looked away, his expression indecipherable. The days merged into a continuous cycle of drills and verbal abuse. The squad maintained their relentless harassment. They would jostle her in formation, accidentally, spill water on her equipment, and whisper just loud enough for her to hear their comments. She was too reserved, too ordinary, too female. She didn't belong there, and they ensured she understood this completely. However, there were brief moments when the dynamic shifted subtly. During a night run, when the squad was scattered across the desert terrain, Sarah passed Ryan, who was limping from a twisted ankle. She slowed her pace just enough to offer him her canteen. "Keep moving," she said quietly. He looked at her with surprise, but accepted the water. He didn't express gratitude, but he also refrained from mockery. It represented a beginning. The harassment escalated to a more sinister level on the 6th day during a survival exercise. The squad was deposited into a dry canyon with minimal supplies, tasked with constructing shelters and signaling for rescue. Sarah was paired with Jake and Mitch, who made it abundantly clear she would receive no assistance. As she gathered branches for a lean-to shelter, Jake snatched her knife from her belt and threw it among the rocks. "Go fetch, princess," he said with a grin. "You excel at chasing objects, don't you?" Mitch participated in the harassment, kicking over her pile of branches and scattering them across the dirt. "This isn't Girl Scout camp," he declared. "You're simply dead weight to us." The nearby cadets laughed, some recording the incident on their phones, the camera clicks echoing through the air. Sarah's jaw clenched, but she remained silent. She walked to the rocks, retrieved her knife, and began reconstructing her shelter, her hands steady despite the trembling in her chest. The squad's laughter reverberated off the canyon walls, but she didn't glance back at them. A week into training, the physical assessment approached ominously. It represented a make-or-break moment for everyone. Body inspections, strength evaluations, medical examinations. Fail any component and face immediate dismissal. The night before the assessment, the squad occupied the mess hall, consuming bland rations under flickering fluorescent lights. Sarah sat alone at a corner table, her meal untouched, her eyes focused on a photo of Tommy she had tucked into her notebook. Travis walked past with his heavily loaded tray and accidentally knocked her notebook to the floor. The photograph fluttered out, landing in a puddle of spilled water. "Oh, how clumsy of me," Travis said, his voice saturated with false remorse. "I hope that wasn't something important, sweetheart." The squad erupted in laughter, some pounding their trays for emphasis. Travis leaned down, bringing his face close to hers. Perhaps if you spent less time daydreaming, you might actually belong in this place. Sarah's grip froze on her fork. She retrieved the photo, carefully dried it with her sleeve, and returned it to the notebook. Her silence carried more weight than their laughter, but the emotional burden crushed her chest. The following morning, during assessment preparation, a quiet moment altered the atmosphere. The squad occupied the armory, inspecting their gear for the day ahead. Sarah was adjusting her rifle strap when an older medic, a woman named Lena with gray streaks threading through her hair, approached her. She had been observing Sarah from a distance throughout the entire week. "You're Mitchell, correct?" Lena inquired, her voice gruff but kindly. Sarah nodded without looking up from her equipment. Lena handed her a small medical kit, the type typically reserved for senior cadets. "Heard about the canyon incident," she said. "Most would have quit after that. You didn't." Sarah's fingers paused on the strap adjustment. She accepted the kit, her eyes meeting Lena's for a brief moment. "Thank you," she said quietly. Lena nodded and walked away. The squad didn't witness this exchange, but Jake observed it. He looked down at his own gear, his movements slowing considerably. The assessment itself proved absolutely brutal. Sarah was called to the front position, the solitary woman in a sea of male cadets. Carlson stood there with his arms crossed, his eyes cold and calculating. "Remain still," he commanded. "If your body doesn't meet military standards, you can return home and wash your hair." The words struck like a physical blow. Derek in the back whistled appreciatively. "Time for the big reveal," he said with a smirk. The others laughed, encouraging his behavior. Carlson's voice cut through the noise. "Remove your shirt," he barked. "Let's see if you're even physically built for this." Sarah didn't move initially. She looked directly at Carlson, her eyes steady, as if she were evaluating him. The training yard fell silent, everyone waiting in anticipation. Then, slowly, she pulled her t-shirt over her head. She stood in her sports bra, shoulders squared, chin elevated, and it was a massive tattoo across her back depicting a flaming serpent coiled around a crimson sigil. It wasn't merely ink. It was a symbol heavy with significant meaning. An instructor named Torres, a younger man with nervous eyes, stumbled backward. "That's Operation Raptor," he whispered. The name hung suspended in the air. Derek's whistle died immediately. Jake looked away, his jaw clenched tight. At that precise moment, Colonel Hargrove, the camp commander, entered the training yard. He was tall, distinguished by gray at his temples, with a presence that commanded absolute silence in any room. He stopped abruptly when he saw Sarah. His eyes locked onto the tattoo, and he froze completely. Then, slowly, he raised his hand and delivered a crisp salute. His voice was low, almost reverent. "We have a ghost viper among us," he announced. The squad didn't know how to respond. Some shifted uncomfortably in place. Others stared at the ground. Carlson's face drained of color, his clipboard forgotten entirely. Sarah showed no reaction. She pulled her shirt back on with calm, measured movements and stepped back into formation. The camp atmosphere transformed completely after that moment. Whispers spread rapidly. Ghost Viper, Operation Raptor. Nobody knew the complete story, but they felt its profound weight. Sarah didn't discuss it with anyone. She didn't need to explain anything. However, not everyone was prepared to accept this revelation. Bryce, a former Navy SEAL and the top-ranking cadet, remained unimpressed. He was built like a tank, possessed a booming laugh and an ego to match. He didn't appreciate being outshined, especially by her. The next day, during hand-to-hand combat drills, he stepped forward with his arms crossed. "If you're really Ghost Viper," he said loud enough for everyone to hear clearly, "prove it. Fight me." The squad froze in place. Carlson began to intervene, but Hargrove, watching from the sidelines, made no movement to stop it. Sarah looked at Bryce, her expression completely unreadable. "I accept," she said, her voice quiet but absolutely firm. They faced off in the center of the yard. Bryce was grinning confidently, bouncing on his toes, ready to make a spectacle of the confrontation. The squad gathered around them, some cheering him on, others simply watching in silence. Sarah stood perfectly still, her hands relaxed at her sides, her eyes locked on him. The whistle blew sharply. Bryce charged forward, aiming a heavy punch at her shoulder. 3 seconds. Moments later, he lay sprawled on the ground, completely unconscious. No one witnessed exactly how it unfolded. A single step, a sharp twist, a fleeting blur of movement. In one instant, he was charging toward her. In the next, he was down for the count. The training yard fell into absolute silence. Sarah took a measured step backward, her breathing controlled and even, then turned and walked away. Hargrove gave a single, approving nod before departing. The harassment persisted even following the confrontation. On the 8th day, during a simulated interrogation drill, Sarah was selected to play the role of prisoner in the exercise. The squad was instructed to question her, but Mitch and Paul transformed it into a cruel performance. They bound her wrists with rope far tighter than the exercise required, the coarse fibers digging deep into her flesh. "Let's discover how resilient you truly are," Mitch declared, prowling around her like a hunting predator. He leaned closer, his hot breath against her cheek. "You're nothing extraordinary, merely a girl masquerading as a soldier." Paul joined the assault, shoving her shoulder with enough force to make her stagger. "Shed some tears for us, princess. Go ahead, make it swift." The squad observed the spectacle, some erupting in laughter, others fidgeting with visible discomfort. Sarah maintained her composure, standing tall despite her reddened wrists from the rope, her gaze fixed steadily on the distant horizon. She remained completely silent. When the exercise concluded, she freed herself with steady fingers and walked out with dignity intact. The squad's laughter gradually died away, but the rope marks remained etched on her skin. The truth began emerging later that same day. During a performance debrief, an intelligence officer named Hayes was examining the squad's activity logs. He stopped abruptly when he reached Sarah's file, his eyes sharpening with recognition. He summoned Torres, the instructor who had previously noticed her tattoo. "This cannot be accurate," Hayes said, indicating a classified document. Torres read the contents, his face draining of color. The document was far more than a standard personnel file. It was a mission report bearing the Ghost Viper unit insignia. It documented Sarah as the primary operative in a classified operation that successfully rescued an entire NATO unit. Hayes looked up, his voice dropping to a whisper. "She's not merely a commander, she's the operative who revolutionized our tactical manual." The room fell silent, though the squad remained completely unaware. Torres carefully refolded the document and returned it to the file, his hands trembling noticeably. The revelation spread rapidly. By the following morning, an officer burst into the yard clutching a classified personnel file. They had processed Sarah's fingerprints through the system. She wasn't simply another trainee, she was Sarah Mitchell, former commander of the elite Ghost Viper unit. Years earlier, she had led a dangerous mission in Syria to extract a captured NATO unit, including Hargrove's son Daniel, who had been taken hostage at age 22. She had infiltrated enemy territory alone, defying direct orders, and successfully extracted every single captive. The file had been sealed, but the truth was now exposed. The devastating final revelation occurred on the 9th day during a public assessment of the squad's progress. The cadets stood in formation as their names were announced alongside their performance scores. When Sarah's name was called, Paul stepped forward boldly, his voice carrying with mocking arrogance. "Mitchell, she's a complete fraud, probably cheated her way through the program." He turned toward the assembled squad with a malicious grin. "I guarantee someone's pulling strings for her, right? There's absolutely no way a girl like that could be legitimate." The squad responded with laughter, some nodding in agreement, others applauding the cruel display. Paul brandished his phone, displaying a photograph he had secretly taken of her during the canyon drill, her face showing strain, her uniform covered in dust. "This is your so-called legend," he announced, projecting the image onto a large screen for everyone to witness. The laughter intensified, becoming increasingly cruel and unrelenting. Sarah remained positioned at the end of the formation, her hands clasped firmly behind her back, her expression completely neutral. However, her knuckles had turned white, and her breathing faltered for just a brief moment. Hargrove summoned the entire base to the main yard that afternoon. Sarah stood at the front, hands positioned behind her back, her face displaying perfect calm. The commander stepped forward deliberately, his metal catching the light. He removed it slowly and ceremoniously, placed it around her neck. From this moment forward, he declared, his voice carrying across the assembled troops, she is no longer classified as a trainee. She is officially recognized as a legend. The entire base rendered a crisp salute, every soldier standing at rigid attention. Even Carlson, his expression tense and conflicted, raised his hand in acknowledgement. Sarah didn't allow herself to smile. She gave a single, respectful nod and stepped back into position. However, the ceremony did not mark the conclusion of events. As the squad began to disperse, a logistics officer named Grant approached Hargrove, clutching a tablet device. "Sir, you must see this immediately," he said, his voice filled with urgency. He accessed a secure feed from archived mission footage. The video was grainy, but sufficiently clear, a solitary figure moving through a war-devastated village, neutralizing 3 hostile combatants within seconds, then carrying a wounded soldier to safety. The rescued soldier was Daniel Hargrove. The lone figure was Sarah. Grant's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "She was only 24 years old, sir. No backup support, no communication systems. She saved every single one of them." Hargrove's grip tightened on the tablet. He looked toward Sarah, who was now walking toward the base exit, and rendered another salute, this time standing completely alone. The squad didn't witness this gesture, but the profound weight of it settled over the entire yard. The consequences unfolded swiftly and decisively. Carlson received immediate reassignment. Hargrove no longer trusted his leadership capabilities after witnessing his conduct. Jake was permanently dropped from the program, his toxic attitude deemed a critical liability. Derek's lucrative sponsorship with a military equipment company was terminated after a video of his disparaging comments went viral across social media. Bryce regained consciousness in the medical facility with a stern ultimatum: improve his behavior immediately or face expulsion. Paul's photograph stunt completely backfired when the same image was discovered by a military blog, exposing his cruel mockery to a wider audience. His application for an elite special forces unit was rejected the very next day. Sarah chose not to remain and observe the aftermath. She packed her duffel bag methodically and headed toward the gate, her boots creating a rhythmic crunch against the gravel path. Nobody uttered a single word as she departed. Her silence communicated everything that needed to be said. She had arrived to honor Tommy's memory, to prove something significant to herself and others. As she walked away from the base, the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, casting elongated shadows across the ground. Her fingers brushed against the metal around her neck, then touched the patch Carter had given her, safely tucked within her bag. This journey had never been about personal glory or recognition. It was about carrying forward a legacy, about becoming the person Tommy had always believed she could be. The gate sealed shut behind her, and she continued walking, her shadow remaining steady and resolute. Somewhere beyond, Tommy was undoubtedly grinning, his infectious laughter echoing in rhythm with her determined steps. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally healing.